I do not believe this for a second. But a persistent rumour to come from MXGP is that Prado has called a couple of teams just to see what the situation is. Which leads us to, I want us to just quickly have our say on this. And I think it's going to be quite a short conversation because we're both going to say the same thing. Prado is better than this, and anyone who's now trying to claim that Prado is just this good and the American series is just this much better is insane. Yep. And I'm interested if you agree with me on this, because I think of Prado as more of a Ryan Dungey than a Jeffrey Hurlings, in the sense that he performs when everything is optimal. He's not so good at pushing through an adverse situation and transforming it into success against all odds. I think he needs everything, all of his ducks to be in a row in order for him to be at his best. It's kind of the personality that I've picked up on over the years. Fair?
Yes. Can I give my opinion very quickly on Prado? I think anyone that's saying he's not good enough, or Kawasaki have made a mistake or anything like that, need to have their head checked. The guy is absolute class, and you need to look at the context of his career to give him more time, because he has ridden Austrian machinery since he was maybe 10 years old or younger. So changing already to another brand, you need to give him time. Hurt his shoulder, did 3 rounds of Supercross, if that. Again, he's coming back from injury. His last motocross race was back at the Motocross of Nations. So he needs time. The AMA Pro Nationals, as we know, is an intense series. What do they get? 2 to 3 fast laps before they're already into the races. Yeah. Again, this is, while Prado came in and smashed GP racing as a 16-year-old, he had been riding European championships, and he had sort of felt his way through European tracks. So he, had that acclimatization. He needs time. One thing I think Jorge maybe has misjudged a little bit is his press work, and I think his enthusiasm for being in the US and tackling Supercross and Motocross and SMX has led to him making some statements that he's very positive. He's going to smash it, he's going to be great, the Kawasaki's a fantastic bike to ride. I think the whole novelty of the situation maybe influence some of his media chatter. And I think he maybe, upon reflection, needs to be a bit more standoffish with that, a little bit more reserved, because it hyped expectations. And, I think people just need to chill, give him more time. And if he's still perhaps doing this kind of form without injury in 2026, then start to be a bit more critical and say, listen, this is not really what we expected from a 4-time world champion in both classes in Europe, against across some of the most diverse, racing surfaces you can find. At the very least, he demands more respect, and he demands that kind of transitional period. Yes, you could say Marvin Muscan and Ken Roxon and the Lawrences were able to maybe get to grips with it slightly quicker. I would put Jorge Prado in that kind of generational bracket. For sure. But every fucker is different. Just give him a little bit more time. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think that comes down to what I said as well about Prado. Just, I don't know how to quite describe it correctly, but I do think he doesn't do well with adversity. Or maybe that's too extreme, but I think, for instance, 2022, he really didn't get on with the gas, and his results were non-existent all year long. He had 1 GP win in 18 rounds or whatever it was that year, and then the next year he was a champion. The switch flicked because it was a matter of comfort, whereas a rider like Hurlings can maybe overcome that more so and muscle a situation. But Prado, and I think it also maybe comes down to Prado's build a little bit and how he needs to be in the right window. In hindsight, and I'm sure he would maybe agree to this, well, it was never correct for him to badmouth KTM as much as he did. And I know that there are people in Austria who are very, very put out by this and kind of can't believe that he said these things after they gave him so much. That's obviously now not helping his case and the way he's perceived, because you told us the Kawasaki was going to be amazing. But also in hindsight, I think it was misguided for him to take on the massive challenge of a new country, a new series, a new way of life, new food, new travel, new humidity, new heat, new time zones, and a new bike. We've never, from memory, I can't think of someone of his stature who's moved and taken on a new bike. Like Roxon, Marvin, they all were good in their first years, but they were not the riders who we came to know in Europe, and they were on the same bike.
And they stay inside the Red Bull KTM structure.
So there's some familiarity. If anything, there's no familiarity for Jorge at the moment at all. So he's got nothing
also,
to cling to.
Yeah, just to cut across you there. I mean, look at Tom Vial. People have been critical of Vial's kind of results. And imagine if Tom had like jumped straight out of Red Bull KTM, where he, made this kind of nest, made his home, and was riding, a Honda or something like that. I think it would have been much more tough. It would have been much tougher for him than, being outside of the Austrian kind of setup, where he's having daily dialogue with Joel Smets. He's able to sort of call Pit Byra, and Pit Byra is saying things to like Roger DeCosta and Harrison, like, take care of this guy. He's been great for us in Europe. Muscan and Roxon did the same thing. I mean, Prado has really jumped straight into like a different boat. And, I think we just, again, I repeat myself, I think we just need to give him more time. And I think he was slightly naive in just sort of, I wouldn't say talking up his chances, but just being overawed by the whole thing. And the same thing with American riders coming to Grand Prix racing. We always say, yes, the same time-honored tale of having to deal with different cultures, different languages, the distance, everything like that, all valid points. But the same also applies to Prado. As much as European riders say, oh, I can't wait to get to the US, and, there's this kind of inspirational, aspirational tone or nature about their ambitions or whatever, it's also a big, big shift. And Prado's still a young guy as well. Just give the guy a break,
Yeah. Also, again, I think his PR needs some work, because even after the second round of Hangtown, when things were already not going great, but certainly better than they are now, I was kind of like giving him some softball questions about like stuff that Vial and Anstey have told me about having to change starting technique because of the way the dirt is prepped on the other side of the gate, and you'd never think of this. And I was telling him this and like how stuff he'd never thought about in an interview, and he cut across me and went, Lewis, motocross is motocross. I win in Europe, I can win here. And in my head, I'm like, that's great. But that's actually not true. Because I even started the question with, Tom told me the reason he doesn't whole shot here. And and I think now maybe he needs to come to terms with that. But also, again, knowing him and his position in the paddock so well, I want to use a different word, but I can't come up with one. His cockiness has infuriated Caroli, Hurlings, etc., Fevra at points over the years. So perhaps his way of communicating has never quite been apt or correct, but it's always been okay because he's always been at the top of his game.
Yeah.
And now he's not. That's starting to bite him in the arse a little bit more. And then the only sorry, go on.
Yeah. No, I'm saying this is the first kind of real dip in sort of form and results compared to expectations that he's really had. I mean, you mentioned that first year on the Gas when they were trying to get the chassis sorted out, but still then Prado was, a top 3 guy most weekends. He wasn't winning as much as he wanted. And ever since he came into GPs, like we said, as a sort of 15, 16-year-old, he came into the class as soon as he could. He's been winning, he's been hyped, he's been feted. Everybody's been saying what a mercurial talent he is. He has embraced that, and he knows how good he is. But I think this is like a whole new challenge, and maybe tougher than he thought in the US, and realistically so. But maybe we're asking too much of, again, generational talents to have this awareness that, they're fallible, and, they actually need to keep working and keep developing. I'm sure they know that. I mean, they work incredibly hard, not just Jorge, but anybody who aspires to have a factory contract at any level of racing. But yeah, it's he's obviously not having a good time at the moment. You can see through the results, but I've no doubt that he's trying to slide in the pieces of the puzzle together to grab a cliche.
Without doubt. And then the only other points I had is the only other time I can think of, like, I it's not even a dip in form, but a time when he didn't meet expectations was when he won the EMX 125 title in 2015, went straight to EMX 250, didn't win a moto, and was kind of a fringe podium guy to begin with, or partly because he was so small compared to his competition. Yeah. But I remember at that point, people were like, oh, I expected him to come in and win immediately. But then he swapped a subpar EMX 250 campaign for a transition to MX2 mid-season and podiumed on debut.
And he was still at school.
So not quite apples to apples.
Well, but he, like Jeremy Sewer, Jeremy was also racing Grand Prix while he was still studying. I mean, and Tim Geiger the same, and these guys were complaining to us at the time in the paddock, I wish I could follow like a full-time training regime, but I have to fit in my studies around racing.
And then there's also, speaking of Sewer, Kawasaki has proven to be a difficult bike to adapt to in Europe, admittedly, but, where there's smoke, there's fire. And I know for a fact, that last year, certain riders spoke to Jorge about the Kawasaki, and he was all praise and everything. And these riders were like, oh, we'll just wait and see. And I know now some of the complaints are the same things he kind of batted away last year. So I think it comes back to what you said about maybe there was some naivety about just the weight of the challenge. But then this is a rider who's never had to deal with that. So understandable. I think the bow I put on all of this is this once again underlines to me the hidden benefits of being like Tim, being like Jeffrey, and sticking with the same team for the duration of your career. Even when there's a new model that maybe isn't ideal, it's still better than having to start from scratch. I mean, look at Chase on KTM, Jeremy on Kawasaki, Glenn when he first got to Yamaha. Those were all switches that the rider initiated, and just it took a lot longer than anyone expected. Like, it just didn't work to begin with. Glenn turned it around. Jeremy never did. Chase has to a degree, although he's still not happy. And I don't know.
The best example, Lewis, is Tony Cairoli. In 2004, he linked up with Claudio De Carli on a Yamaha and stayed with that setup his whole career. And look how much that delivered, through a change of Yamaha machinery, then onto KTM, winning titles with the 350, the 450. He's the prime example of how when you find your group that can support you in so many ways, then you don't budge out of that. And I know Jorge had his beef with KTM because he felt he was undervalued. He had to push quite hard to get a renewed contract, even though he was locked into a long-term one that he signed through his own volition. He somehow felt slighted by KTM towards the end. And, he's aired his kind of comments on that. But then also he had a bike and he had the right kind of love, I guess you could say, in some aspects that, enabled him to do the job.
Yeah, and I would bet, without knowing this, I would bet he's pining for his KTM or his Gas now, because he's thinking to himself, if I had that, I'd at least be able to show the real me. But it's very interesting, and it's not good PR for MXGP, because now all of the people who want to pedal the America is so much better than MXGP are having a field day. I will say also, actually, this needs to be clarified. I strongly believe, and I honestly would take this to the grave, almost did. The reason why Patrell and Guillaume, not Guillaume, are competitive and mirroring their MXGP results, if not better, is I believe that to pick a number, 8th place down, MXGP is so much more competitive than America. I strongly believe that. I'll probably get shit for it. But from 8th place up, maybe America is deeper and more competitive than MXGP. That's why you see such a striking contrast from the lower tier riders to the top tier riders, even Boutron and whatnot. So that's that as well.
And I also think your chances of going a perfect season in MXGP is zilch.
Yeah.
I mean, you have 8 more rounds, but even then to stitch together 24 consecutive moto wins in MXGP, Hurlings has probably come closest, Stefan Everts as well in 2006. But, that's their how can I describe it? The rarity rather than the common thing. And, when you go into a season thinking, well, is Jet Lawrence going to win every moto again now? I think that's also says something about, also Lawrence, but then about the series. But I think the whole, this series is better than that series is just a load of nonsense anyway. And it's been around for years and years and years. It's so tired. And the cases are so particular. And I think Prado will be a hell of a lot better in 2026 than he is now.
Agreed. I just wonder if he'll still be in the same situation.